At a time to let the viewers jump on the stream. I'll make one more announcement in, I guess, 2 minutes. I'll make another announcement on the main room. But we are live. You're not gonna start just yet, but we're live on the stream. I'll make another announcement in 2 minutes. Final call, and then we'll go ahead and start.
Okay, so then for everybody that's here, we just want to say that we're sorry.
I'd also like to say that you're probably going to need coffee for this. If you don't have it now, you've got 2 minutes basically.
Get a
coffee, some sort of form of caffeine to make it through the presentation.
Pillow and a blankie, maybe. Oh!
Steve Burns is the first
I mean, this will be about 10% more exciting than the Snoozy Newsy.
Testing. Now you can hear monotone in stereo.
Yes. Terry, did you bring enough for everybody?
Well, it's just water, so. I'm just getting far away from the speaker of the camera.
If you're in the back, it's easier to snooze and have us not notice.
No, that's not what I meant at all. Thanks a lot, Curtis.
We go, Steve?
You can go.
Okay. Hi, so welcome to our seminar / snooze fest. We're becoming some features of BASIC09 that are not documented in the Tandy microware manuals. Some of this stuff was added by Kevin Darling and some other people back in the late 80s when they were working on the level 2 version 3 upgrade that never got officially released. And then there's some stuff that we've added in with the Nitrous 9 project as well. So we'll be doing some sample demonstrations of some of these things. Ken will be covering some of the more basic commands. I'll be covering some of the more advanced stuff like the pull-down menus and stuff, doing it from basic a lot easier than it would normally be. And we're going to have basically Ken's going to cover the stuff at the first, and then I'll cover the more advanced stuff in the middle, and then we'll have a question and answer session if you guys have any questions, if you're still awake. And that'll be at the tail end of the presentation. So Ken, did you want to take it away on the beginning stuff?
Okay, well, so as Curtis said, that this is mostly things that aren't covered in the documentation, but there is actually documentation for some of it, and if you're looking to find that, then if you're in the Nitrous 9 EOU hard drive, then you can look in the directory and see that there is a directory called, yeah, I'm really well prepared for this, okay, docs, yes. So if you change the directory to docs, then you can look in there. There's lots of stuff, but there is one called gfx2 underscore edition4.txt. So if you use the bu command, yeah, you can watch how slow I can type.
At least you're accurate, I'm not.
And I'm doing it with one hand. Anyways, you can use the VU or just list the documentation. And the things that most of the stuff that we're going to be covering is actually in this file. So if you need to refresh your memory on any of this stuff, it's in here.
And there will be eventually, we're currently redoing the entire 1,000+ page manual, which is probably going to get close to double the size by the time we're done. And we are working on the BASIC09. That's one of the sources we're still working on. So these will be added in there. So eventually we'll get the PDFs that have all this.
But yeah, so you can find it in the docs for now. And so this first stuff everything I'm going to be looking at is a BASIC09 commands here. And the first thing I am going to be looking at is The second line there you can see is the run GFX2 winfo. And this is a command that gives you all of the information you need about the current window that you're using. You need it's 6. It gives you 6 pieces of information, all in integer. So you have to define the variables you're using as integers, and then when you run that, it gives you your screen type, your width, your height, your foreground color, background color, and border color of the current screen you're using. So that can come in handy when you want to preset some variables for redoing a window if you had to change it or anything like that.
Yeah, another reason for doing is if you want to make your program size aware, because of course you can resize windows and have multiple windows on the same screen. So if you have a program that you want to be able to run on any size of window, you can use this to figure out what the current size and adapt how you're printing menus, etc. to the screen based on that.
Yeah, with eSight. Now, the next thing that I am going to show you is there's a tone generator in here. So it's the bottom line there, the run GFX2 tone, and then you have to input a frequency, a duration, and a volume. And your frequency can be anything from 1 to 4095. So, and your duration can be 60ths of a second. Although one thing that's not in the documentation, that if you go above 255 60ths of a second, it resets to 1/60th. So 256 is actually 1/60th of a second again. So 3 point however many seconds that is. You can do it for. And you can set your volume, and I don't know how loud this is going to be, so I'm going to set it low.
We'll find out.
And it's coming through a little bit warbly, but
That's techno music.
yeah, there you go. You can.
That was our jam session last night. That's pretty well the whole thing sounded like.
I think that was warbly after listening to Curtis's guitar. I'm not sure.
I think you violated the effing patent.
Now, the next things I'm going to show you is some graphical commands that can make things a little bit easier when you're doing some graphics. So, the first one to look at is the F circle command. So what this does is it draws a pre-filled circle. And I just have a little program here to run it where it's going to continually draw smaller and smaller circles inside of each other. So and don't pay any attention to the high squealing. So as you can see, it's just making a little bit of a dartboard. And I intentionally slowed this down so that you can see the circles drawing. And the good thing about it is it does it all in one command, so you don't have to use the fill statement and figure out where you've got to put the fill point and all that other stuff. It just automatically draws it pre-filled.
You'll also notice that the circles are much better drawn than Microsoft Basics. Just thought I'd pump that out.
So I will take out the pause command here. There it is. And run it one more time to show you how fast it goes without pausing. So just draws a nice little bullseye there, nice and quickly, all pre-filled circles. There's also a pre-filled ellipse command, and surprise, surprise, that is F ellipse. Does exactly the same thing. So I will add that to the same program. And then it just draws a couple of ellipses there. Exciting, isn't it? Yeah, so you save some time is nice.
I will mention too that the way this is working, it's not like it's calling a regular circle and then calling an actual paint. This is a single command that's been added to the graphics driver to do filled ellipses and filled circles in one pass. So it's not just cheating and doing 2 commands in a row.
So you can change where
Yes.
Yeah, you can change the
So as you
diameter.
can see here, I'm setting the color ahead of time, so that's setting the color to your circle. Then I'm drawing the ellipse, then I change the color for the second circle, then drew the ellipse. So it's taking whatever the foreground color is and turning it in and making it.
Then you specify the center point with the setting it, and then you can also specify in the ellipse commands case, you can specify the vertical and the horizontal.
Yeah, so both the circle and the ellipse commands works exactly the same way as the regular circle and ellipse commands with just setting the center point, then the radius for the circle, and it draws it filled. The ellipse, you set the radius, or the center point, then you set the radius for the X plane and the Y plane, and then it draws your ellipse. And now the next thing I'm going to show you. There's also something in the draw command. So if you're familiar with the draw command, you know that when you're drawing, you have to set the pointer with the set PPR command, or SPPR, I think it is. Yeah. Anyways, you have to set the pointer first, and then you draw, and it starts drawing from wherever you set the pointer. Well, you can eliminate that line because, as you can see here, if you use the draw command, just like you normally would, if you put 2 coordinates in before you start with the directional movements, that's actually setting the pointer wherever you want. So you can actually do it all within the same line, which makes it a little more readable, a little easier, and
Smaller code.
And smaller code. So there, I just drew a little house there. I just skipped something I was going to tell you, so I will relist that. You can see that for doing the triangle, I use the U command, which is the same. Everything works exactly the same with the draw command. Just adding those 2 coordinates on any of the commands will set your pointer. So for drawing the triangle that I have at the top there, it draws it, it sets the pointer, then it draws, what is that called? So yeah, it works for both the direction statements and the statements for drawing relative vectors. And when you draw the relative vector, it just resets to the draw point, and then you can draw another vector. I'm assuming you're familiar with the draw statement. If you are not familiar with the draw statement, a little bit of self-promotion. I did do a video on my YouTube channel about 2 weeks ago about doing all this with the old commands. These are just updated, better commands to use than what I showed in the video. My channel is Canadian Retro Things, so that's my self-promotion.
Please feel free to clap now.
Please, be too kind, be too kind. Oh, yes. Well, I'm Canadian, so I'm shameless.
I don't know about the shameless part, but sure.
Just save that pause thing out of there to keep slowing down the program. Now, the next thing I'm going to show you isn't a graphics command. It's the transparency character switch command.
You're still in minute 1.
Yes, I am. Text. So the transparency character switch, I don't know if you're familiar with that. What it is you just basically have 2 states that it's in. It's either on or it's off. when it is on, it leaves your background below. And this works on both the graphics and the text screens. When it's off, it actually erases everything in the background. So if I add that to this little graphics program here, this is a lot easier to do when I had two hands to type. I'll add it to the end here. So it draws all this stuff and asks whether I want the transparency character switch on or off. So I can show you what it does in both cases. So on, it actually prints all this stuff right over top of the graphics without affecting anything that's underneath it. Now if I run that again, and I run it with it off, you can see it erases everything that's behind it. Now, as I said, this works on both graphic screens and on text screens.
I will mention that the original was on level 2. It did this in graphic screen. That's been built in. The part about using the hardware text screen is a little bit different. Basically, what it'll do is it'll pick whatever your current foreground color is to print your text, but whatever the background color was on the screen already at that point, or blank was on, or underline was on, that gets left alone. So you can use it to overwrite things with a new foreground color without having to remember what the heck the person had underneath. So.
Yeah, and as you can see, this is a text screen or a graphic screen, so it's in screen mode 8. So, and the last thing I am going to bore you with is ID num. It is just simply a statement that returns the process ID of your current window. So when I run that, you can see that its process ID is 3. Well, that's the exact same stuff you can get if you run the proc command. So if I run the proc command, you can see that ID3 is currently the one that's running BASIC09. So it'll basically just show you that. And Curtis is going to tell you more about what that would be useful for.
Size matter.
Sorry, what's that feedback that you hear when you do a screen?
That's the, it's picking up something from the computer.
Okay.
I think it's a CoCoFEST DC actually, because I was noticing that earlier too. It seems to get worse
I
when it's
was noticing it whenever it's drawing graphics, it's doing that. So it's like a feedback through the speaker system somehow. I don't know. Apparently they didn't design these computers to run with that.
We really like it.
We reinvented AM radio.
I'll let Curtis take over the computer.
You guys have to do that every year.
Oh, sure, no problem. Okay.
Okay, so to kind of pick up where Ken left off here, the ID command is useful, especially using stuff like input buffers, because one problem that a lot of us programmers had in level 2 first came out, because we're used to disk space, we're not used to being in a multitasking environment. So you might run one program that's doing some graphics editing, and you might run another one for a game or something like that, and everybody just pick group, like buffer numbers, input buffers, unlike disk basic, are not based on strings, they're based on a group number and a buffer number within the group. And people would just hard code, like, I'm gonna use group 2 for my program, and then somebody else, uploaded a CompuServe Delphi and did the same thing, and their program used buffer 2 as well. And then you run both programs at the same time, and then of course it trashes whatever the first program did, replaces them all. They could be the wrong screen type, the wrong size, whatever else. And then when you go back to your first program and you try to run anything, everything just goes complete bonkers in case the machine completely crashed because it's trying to do graphic stuff that it was not designed to do. So the way to get around that was to make sure you had unique buffer numbers for yourself for your own program. So if you use the ID number, because every process ID, every program that's running in OS9 has a unique process ID number, you're guaranteed that nobody else has that. So you would use this command here, the ID num, grab your process, in this case 3, and then you could use all the 255 graphic buffers in group 3. And you wouldn't have to worry about interfering with anybody else. Now what happens if you need more than 255 graphics buffers? You do some complicated animated game or something like that. Well, what we tend to do there, like BASIC09 right now, level 2 for the CoCo is limited to a maximum of 32 processes. So basically what you would do there is just add 32, add 64, and keep going adding 32 up till group 200. Group 200 now was reserved by Tandy and Microware for like fonts and paint patterns, and we've added card decks and other things. So they're system-wide. They're meant to be shared by everybody. So those you kind of just keep away from unless you're adding to those. So basically, if you just add 32, you get another 255 buffers, and you add 64, you can get another. You get up to over 1,500 buffers. So I think for a single program, that's probably enough. The first little bit here, I'm going to cover two. Besides that, I don't really have anything to demo per se on it, but there's a couple of techniques too. Like I was talking about doing in a multitasking operating system. One thing you should try to do, if you can, is try to make it CPU friendly for other tasks when you don't need the CPU. So if you're, say, running an in-key loop, let's say you'll prompt, press enter to continue type thing. What we're used to in this basically just do, in-key and just do it, in a continuous loop forever. Well, it's eating a lot of CPU time, and technically the system's not going to read the keyboard more than 60 times per second. That's how often it checks the PIs to hit key. But if you got it in a hard-coded loop, it's checking it way more than that. It's never going to get a different result. So the other, programs in the system will take a take a bit of it. I just saw the splash of purple go by. So basically, it'll take the other programs in the system will take a bit of a hit there because you're just sucking CPU time using a completely wasted read of keyboard. So what you can do is you can add things like a sleep call. And that's where you have to get the system calls. That we don't have a little BASIC09 thing for that yet. But just, if you learn to use syscall, you can access every single API that OS9 has for BASIC09. So there's a ton of power in there to get to, and we'll get that in this discussion here. But one friendly thing you can do is just do the in key and then check if there's a key press that you're actually looking for. If there's not, sleep for a tick count of 1, which is a special one that means sleep for the remainder of my time slice. So basically, you're giving the CPU time back to every other process in the system for the rest of the 60th of a second. So they all get that CPU time, and you're basically going to sleep and not doing anything until the next time you actually could read a different key based on the key scans that are actually done in the operating system itself, based on BASIC, which is 1/60th of a second or 1/50th if you have a PAL. So it makes things a lot smoother, and you can actually see things running. If you guys saw my little demo later yesterday, I had the line drawing program there. And then I was also playing Rogue in the other window. And originally I did not have a sleep call in the line drawing program. And it was going a little bit faster, but it was also causing every time you go to Rogue, you notice a definite slowdown because of this pause. I changed it to draw the line and then sleep for the remainder of ticks, and I think that smoothed it out quite a bit. So it's smoother multitask in that case. And now if you're actually trying to do a graphic game, you probably don't want to slow down your graphics like I did, but it was more visually to show you what that sleep call can do to smooth things out. So that's one thing there. Okay, I'll get into some of the more advanced graphic features here. So. Oh. I should mention, I've actually put this image with my stuff on my website as a private link. I'll probably make it public later, but I just threw it up there quickly before I left. So if you guys want to grab this so you don't have to type all this crap in and actually just look it up yourself. It's a disk image. It's on my site, lcurtisboyle.com, and it's called seminarc.dsk. So feel free to download it. It'll run the emulators or on real hardware. The in keys there is just basically a couple of lines of code that did what I just described. It's pretty self-explanatory, so you can just take a look at that. I'll just go straight in the autofall.
Sorry, what was it again? SeminarC?
DSK. So it's just a raw fluffy image. Okay, so one thing that people generally tend to like to do is if you are making a graphics editing program or a game that requires a mouse or something like that, you want to be able to move the mouse and put the cursor on the screen. Now the old way to do this is you have to put the cursor, and if the guy moved the mouse, you have to check and read the mouse, and you have to move the mouse cursor, and you have to keep doing this in a loop and everything else. One thing that's built into OS9 Level 2, and in Microsoft in particular, is called Autofollow Mouse. And if you turn this on, the operating system does all that for you. You just have to turn it on. The only thing you have to do is make sure you're in graphics mode, make sure you have a mouse plugged in, and then make sure that you do the command. You can see here on set mouse and on mouse. So on mouse is the critical one here that actually will just tell it to turn it on, and you can actually just run them through. Or sorry, that set mouse is the one that does that. And you got a couple parameters there. And then on mouse is a special call that's been added into the JPEX2 now in the new version. And what that does is it basically says, put my BASIC09 program to sleep and let the operating system handle moving the mouse and everything else, and it'll come back out only when you click the button. So basically, it's also freeing up time because BASIC09 is not running this program constantly, also it's letting the operating system do it at its own pace. And you can actually set how often it samples the mouse as well. So to get into some specifics there, the set mouse command is 3 parameters. You can see I've got 3,1,1, and that's the fourth line from the bottom. And that is 3 mouse parameters. So I will mention that something that I've added into EOU is that if you put a 255 there, it'll leave the system settings alone that you already have for those parameters. And that's been added so that every time you run something, you're not changing stuff for G-Show, some other program that thinks it knows what it's doing at what speed. So the first one is how many 1/60th of a second ticks between mouse reads. So I've got that currently set to 3, so it's doing 1/20th of a second, which is fine, but it also frees up a little bit of CPU time, so it's not scanning it constantly. And you can change that if your program needs faster mouse movement, feel free. The second parameter is how many 60th of a second ticks before a mouse button times out. So that basically lets you, how long do you have to hold down a button to click type thing, or how long to let go. And the third one is your auto follow. So if you put a 0 there, it'll turn the auto follow mouse off if you do want manual control, or you just want to shut the mouse cursor off completely. And if you put a 1, it'll actually do the auto follow. And then the line after that, the on mouse, which basically just has a one parameter that's currently being used. There's some stuff I have to do to enable some things afterwards. I won't talk about this here. So you just set it to 0. Basically what that will do is tell the BASIC09 program to go to sleep until mouse click. Then it will handle the movement of the mouse and stuff too. So I will run that one. But put a little bit of directions here on the screen. Now I don't have an actual mouse here, but I will use a keyboard mouse.
Ooh.
You move it around slowly and stuff. Keyboard mouse. And with keyboard mouse, F1 and F2 are your buttons, and right now I've got it set because I don't care which one you hit, but I'll just hit F1. And it says mouse button clicked, and 1 means button 1. At the mouse cursor position 133,81, so that's where the little end of the pointer is pointing to. And you notice the mouse is still on the screen. So right now my BASIC09 program, I can still move the mouse around, but I'm still actually in BASIC09 itself here, so I can still list it and still move the mouse while it's running around here. So you can see that it's actually multitasking the mouse even with my BASIC09 program not even running at this point. And then you can of course shut that off too. So it just really helps because you don't have to write all this code. So basically to write a program that actually moves the mouse cursor around, updates the screen to push over where the mouse cursor is, and then clicks on a button and tells you where it is just that tiny little bit of code. Most has to set up the window of the most parameters. The critical part is just the last few lines there. That's all you need to do a mouse. So that's all I usually did do it. It's basic. You'll hear me say that a lot, but it's basic. Sorry.
Come in handy if you're doing a lecture and you didn't want to use your laser pointer.
Yeah.
Your mouse there.
So that's how you get the mouse going without you having to do much coding to actually do it. So next step. Okay, now we're getting into the menus. This is a little more complicated because this is doing full drop-down menus and menu selections and stuff like that. So you will need a bit more code for that. But it's still a lot less than it used to be. So there's certain structures you have to find. If you go to the GFX2 edition 4 docs, the docs directive, there's explanations of exactly how they do it. I actually just copy theirs and adjust them for whatever, like how many menus I have, how many items are on a menu type thing. But there's certain things you have to dim for it. You don't have to call them the same names I did. That's just what the samples used in the documentation. So I just duplicate here so it's easier to follow along with. But you basically define a few different things here, and then you have a bunch of little commands. There's a couple values that we're doing here just to make it easier to read the code. Like you just like enable flag and disable flag if they're just integers defined as 0 or 1 type thing.
What are those numbers, those 4 numbers, columns to the left?
Oh, if you're not familiar with BASIC09, that's the relative offset code size-wise within the BASIC9 program. So that looking at the very top, you can see there, that line is starting 32 hex bytes into the BASIC9 program. We're looking at the next line. So it's just the hex address offset within the BASIC9 code.
Thank you, Dominator Anderson.
But that's fine. We wanted to make sure beginners and people that have actually used BASIC9 quite a bit but have not tried any of the new stuff we've added. So. The shell command stuff is because this particular demo program, actually you click on something that actually runs an external program. So those are just, for my program demo, basically just some commands that want to come in. And they're setting up some graphics just like Ken did, setting some palettes. These are standard stuff in the CoCoFEST menu. And then we get into the actual menu things here. So this will take a little bit of explanation. So let's go back again. So there's a few basic structures you'll need if you're going to do menus. They're kind of labeled to make sense in this one. Like I said, you can name them whatever you want. You can make them longer descriptive names if that's easier for us. So WD basically is window descriptor. Now this is not a window descriptor as in like a W1 or a W2 in the operating system. This is a window descriptor for doing like scroll bar windows or bordered windows, that kind of thing. It's a subtype basically is what it is. And these were introduced with multi-view. That wasn't part of the original LoSR 2. That was part of the multi-view package that came out a few months later. And it's been a bit expanded, a bit of a 3D look at stuff now that the original didn't have. So the WD one in specific here, and the M1 and M2 are the critical ones that are here. So you can see the lines. Actually, I'll get them on screen. Since I have a pointer, I might as well use it, right?
Yeah.
So here's the W2, that's window descriptor 1. This is like the menu stuff here. And you just define them as strings. Now in BASIC09, if you just say string and you don't define the size, it defaults to 32 bytes, which is pretty close to what these calls internally need anyway, so it's a nice easy way to not remember a specific number, fit them to a certain size. And I've got some comments in here too to help you with some of the lines. Okay, so the window descriptor 1, WD, this one must be dimmed to the number of menus you want, and then you have to add 1 to it because there's a built-in close box in every window that every frame window that you need to have, and that counts as a menu selection. When you click on it, it'll have to return a specific number hard code in the operating system to tell you that somebody clicked the close box, they want to kill this window off. So you have to add 1. If you're going to have 3 menus on your own program, you do 3 plus 1 is 4. If you have 2 menus, then you have 2 plus 1, so you can put 3 here. So in my case here, I made it 3 because I'm going to have 2 pull-down menus. And then we need some string arrays for the pull-down menus themselves. And since we're doing 2 menus, I've labeled them M1 and M2. So this is the array for the first, like how many items we're going to have in the first menu option, and then how many items on the second menu option. So I've got a larger menu, first menu and a smaller second menu. So in this case, I have 4 items in the first menu, and I'm going to have 2 items in the second menu. I will mention we've got some variables defined here, menu underscore ID and menu underscore item, which are when you tell it to return what menu selection somebody's done, it'll actually come back and tell you which menu ID number they picked, and then which item on the menu it picked, and then also can return certain things that they put in the close box.
Is this base 1 or base 0?
Base 1.
Okay, just
You can change that. I mean, BASIC09 has the option of changing. There's a base command. You can set all of your arrays. Just remember, all of your arrays change if you want to use base 0.
Because otherwise you'd have actually 5 to 3 with base 0.
Yeah, but I'd have to put a base 0 command in first. You can do that. I mean, you just have to track that on your own. And in some cases, it's easier to do certain functions that do with base 0. So BASIC09 lets you choose it.
Can I ask you, Curtis, since you're displaying the arrow right now, can you change the direction so it's not pointing up left? Can you change it to point right?
I'd have to load in a new graphic for that because it just
Okay.
has a built-in one, and I don't have that one handy.
Okay, just checking.
But yeah, you could if you just find your own graphics cursor, if you're trying to do. I think there's 8 built in, like the hourglass and the text marker and the arrow and
Oh, okay.
the do not do symbol when you're off window and stuff.
If you change the graphic to the arrow, is it smart enough to change the hotspot?
That's a good question.
That might get confusing.
Yeah, I don't know if you can. I think it's kind of hard to put. I'll have to check that. I can't remember.
Right now, the hotspots are very thin, right?
Yeah, that's a lot more in this case. Actually, I think you might be able to because I think some of the other ones actually have it in the middle. If I remember some of the non-pointer ones, but I'll have to check. I was expecting that question, so I didn't research it. Sorry. That would be the actual multi-view the OSN2 manual because that's an operating system standard thing, and that's not something new. Like the pointer system's been in there since the beginning. Even if you don't have multi-view, you had most pointers. Okay. Now I will mention that menu item numbers, you define that yourself in your program, but the first 32 are reserved. And there's like the scroll bar pointers, like the up arrow, the down arrow, the left arrow, the right arrow, that's part of it. The Tandy menu's got a reserved one. And there's a few other ones that reserve that you don't always have to use, but are optional. And they kind of reserved that because they wanted to make a standard that everybody would follow for these basic menus. And I would highly recommend staying with that. It's not enforced. You can totally go around it and break it. But it will cause some problems if you're trying to run a couple different programs and you're hard coding a menu. It's just like hard coding a buffer number. That can be problematic. Hard coding a menu number within the first 32, that's not always the standing spec. Also can cause problems, so please don't do that. Anyway, I've got a couple of variables here defined to receive the ID number and the menu item within the ID number. The ID number is which the menus you actually clicked on. Then I got MID disk, which is the very third line from the bottom. So these are the menu numbers we're defining. I just made them into variables just so I could make the listing later on instead of having like 32, which you'd have to kind of guess what the heck I'm looking at. I'm just going to define them as something that actually makes sense, and it'll use the actual name of the variable so you can see I'm talking about the disk or I'm talking about the memory menu. You don't have to do that. You can hard code it if you want, as long as you're outside of the first 32.
The first dimension line there, that mid disk, that's one. And mid mem, that's another. And they're both integers, right?
Yeah. And then the enable disable is just a shortcut to do a 0 and a 1. In text format, use the variable name instead of the actual number, so you know what I mean. And then I got some internal variables just for the basic program itself. And then we've got some energy defining for some of the mouse commands, the valid fire MSX line up here. Those are actually used by some of the mouse commands, and I'll get into those in a second. And some standard menu stuff was actually from my internal program, shell commands internal, response that's internal, kind of skip those. Now, the standard menus here, I've actually defined a few of the ones just that you could click on the window in particular that I set up to what the numbers return. So the actual number of the array element, like a 2, like I mentioned before, there's some reserved ones that Tandy did. The close box, the upper left corner, that always returns a 2. The scroll up is always returning a 4. Scroll right down is always returning a 5, and that's part of that 32 predefined ones. I'm not using them all in here, but I just wanted to show a couple of them there. And then I just do the enable disable just to set that up. So here, over here, I've chosen disk menu to be menu number 33 and the memory menu to be number 34. And then we'll use the actual variable name just so it's easier to follow later. And then after that, I kill the current window and restart it up just because I don't have a clue if you're in a text window or an any column or whatever, so I make it consistent. You could make it so that it actually kind of auto-figures out using that winfill command that Ken covered, and you can actually adjust the positioning of your stuff based on, okay, I know what I need to call it, I know when to vertical. And I set some panels just to make the grays look nice for that 3D look. And then we get into the actual set mouse. This is starting to get into the new stuff again. So I did the set mouse setting there, some big 3 ticks. I'm leaving the other counter alone. The 2P5 just means leave it whatever it's currently set to in the system. And setting up the autofill mouse. And then now we're setting up the multi-view menus, and this is all the new stuff here. So the first command for setting up the menu is title. And you'll see title, you have to send the window descriptor array, whatever you called it. I'm calling it WD as your first parameter. Then the actual menu test is the name of the menu. Now, on a full screen window, you'll probably never really see this, but basically if you have multiple windows on the same physical screen, you have to know which is the active window. And what happens is if they have the menu bars on them for pull down menus, so you have a couple on the same, like if you run G shell and you run the control panel, it actually pops the control panel inside G shell. And you'll notice in that case that the G shell menu, which is like file and whatever else is your menu pull downs, changes to just say G shell. That's your window title. So basically, if the window's inactive, that's what it's going to put up in the menu bar instead of actual menus to let you know that's the name of the program, but you can't pull any menus because you're not actually active on that window. So in this case, I'm just calling my menu test. Now, if it's a full screen window, you'll only catch that if you hit the clear key, and you just get to see it redraw it really quick as you switch it from being active to inactive when you're going between windows. So in this case, you probably won't see it. But you have to put it in anyway. And if you're running multiple programs and windows on the same physical screen, you definitely do need that so you know which one you're actually dealing with the most. And then after that, we go into the items. Which is the menu and items command. So the menu actually sets up the menus themselves. This is setting up your actual menus, like what menu items you're going to be able to do pull downs from. We defined 2 in here. One called disk, and we're setting the menu ID disk, which is that 32 we did before. And then some other options, then we enable it. You can actually disable under program control. You can do this while the program's running. You can actually enable and disable menus and menu items on the fly. So let's say you have an option to save a file. Well, if you haven't made a file name or something, you may not want to let the guy try to save. That might be a bad example. You probably just prompt for it. But basically, you can disable that menu until something else happens. And then you can enable it again. And then menu items, you can do the same thing too. So you can actually enable and disable, and you'll kind of see them dim out the wording. So in this case, I'm just enabling the menu there. With the M1 array, which had 4 elements, if you remember, we're defining that kind of 4 menu items, and then immediately following that, just to kind of keep them grouped together, I actually list what each of your 4 items that are going to be on the pull down are. So we've got dir, free, PWD, and format. And those are menu items 1, 2, 3, 4, as you can see here. That's what the 2 will print on the screen. And then after that, you can put the enable disable, which is technically a 0 or 1. In this case here, I have the format command disabled because I don't accidentally format his hard drive image here.
Yeah, I noticed that.
You're welcome, Ken. But the other ones are enabled, which is the dir, free, and PWD commands. And then I start defining menu 2 here, which is the only 2 item one. So we define that as having memory as the name it's going to put for the actual menu. And then the menu ID mem, which was 34, I believe. And then some parameters for that. The parameters are basically setting like the width of it and how much room it's going to take and that kind of thing. And then enabling that one. So that menu is currently enabled. Then we enable the 2 items that are on that one. 1 and 2 for that will be M, free, and proc. And I have both of those enabled. So that menu is going to be completely enabled. The first menu is going to be the first 3 enabled, and the last one's going to be disabled. So I know how to format his drive.
Just re-download it from your site.
And then I put a little comment here, necessary to change colors to make the menu readable before calling when set. So that's just setting the right colors. I set it to the default font. You can actually set it to different fonts if you want. You can make your own custom ones. And then here's the when set command. Now this is the critical one that actually does change. Like when you do a DWND set, that just creates the screen in whatever resolution graphics text you want. The when set is actually the one that starts doing the subtypes, which is do you want a bordered window with like a double box, or do you want a single box, or do you want plain, or do you want a menu but no scroll bars, or do you want a menu with scroll bars? And that's just various numbers. That's in the multi-view manual. You get the parameters for that. But basically, that's what that's setting up here. So I'm doing subtype 2, which in this case is a menued window with scroll bars inside. Now, in this particular demo, I'm actually not using the scroll bars, but you could. And then once again, you have to point to the window descriptor because it kind of knows where it's going to be doing all this internal storage. You don't have to worry about what's in the app, you just have to have it defined. Then I shut the cursor off, change the color, clear the screen, set a different font. And then I go to a read loop here. Now this loop looks pretty good, or pretty big compared to the one I showed you before for just doing outfall mouse, but that's because it's actually checking and actually running all the menu options within the loop itself as it encounters them. So in this case, we set the on mouse and say basically, wake me up when you hit a button, and then you go and pick everything. Then we have the mouse command itself here actually gets some parameters from the mouse itself, and basically since we know the person clicked the button right before that they get out of the on mouse command you can get here, we can immediately start processing what's happening. So the options there's the 6 integer variables. There's valid, and that will return a 0 or 1. And that is checked to see whether the person clicked on the active window itself. Like if my program was trying to read, let's say we're on a screen with 2 or 3 windows on it, it'll detect that I clicked on the screen, and the valid will be set to 1. If you're not on the active window, it'll return a 0 instead. So you can say he clicked on a different program running on the side or something like that, so I can ignore it in my program and just go back to sleeping. That program should be handled. Then we have the fire, which is checking which fire buttons you've got. One is left button, or I guess it depends if you're looking at joystick or mouse, whether it's left or red or whatever. 2 is the second one. You can actually check to see both are pressed at the same time if you want to make it so that you have to do something weird. If it's both buttons, you can. Because a lot of people still have 1 button mice or 1 button joysticks. If you don't absolutely need the 2 button, I probably recommend just using 1. There will be some extensions to G Shell coming in the future that will actually require the second button or some sort of keyboard alternative things. I want to kind of do the equivalent for some Windows and give you some special options, so that will be coming. But for your own programs, if you want it to be universal and not have it for people that don't have 2 button mice or 2 button joysticks, if you can, do it for 1. So that comes down in here. This here checks to see if it's valid. We're on a window that actually we're trying to interact with. And the fire button 1 is down. And area. Now area has a couple numbers reserved. So if you have a bordered window, there's a thing called the control region. And the control region is the menu bar and the scroll bars and stuff. So that's telling you the mouse cursor is within those areas. You're actually receiving some control thing that the person's clicked on. And then there's another one that says you're within the window interior, not including the control area, like he's clicked right in the main screen of whatever your program's doing. And then you've also got the one that you click somewhere off, even if there's not another window to find. Let's say you defined a half screen window, but you haven't put anything on the other half at all. It'll return a different value saying you're off the current window, but you're probably not supposed to do anything there. So in this case here, I check to see if you've actually hit the fire button 1 and you hit the control. Yeah, so the cursor X, Y, I did this kind of because I didn't know at this point if the person actually selected something. Like you can click in the menu bar, but if I only have 2 menus on the left and you click on the right and there's nothing, what that will detect to do is I'm going to actually print on the screen where did you click. But that just kind of did the correct Y, the erase to the end of the window, basically clear any previous thing that was on the screen already. And basically, I'm just kind of doing that as a pre-setup just in case you did not click an actual menu, just click randomly in the top bar somewhere. And the next credit one here, this is the one that does most of the work. This is called get select. And basically what that's going to do, the operating system will return in menu ID and menu item. It'll return, and you have to take consideration scroll bars, pull boxes are included in that, so you have to use those reserved numbers. But basically I'm really checking to see, did they click on one of the menus I have, and if they did, which selection did it pick? The operating system did all the graphics for doing that on its own with that one command earlier. You don't have to do any coding for that whatsoever. So it returns back what they are. And I'm checking this here. If the menu ID is not equal to 0, which means you've actually clicked on a legitimate thing, it'll actually tell you which item and menu number you clicked on, which return those 2 variables. And if you didn't, it'll just say you click the button, and it'll tell you the screen coordinate that you click the button at. You don't, I mean, technically, you're only reacting to anything. You don't need this, I just want to demonstrate it. And then it also will do the clicking if you're outside the control region and stuff. You're doing, so that's what that else part is. Over this little block here. And then as a check to see if you click the close box, I set the loop exit flag, or if you actually pick the menu selection. And then I have some handling for the specific menus themselves and what it calls, etc. So that's basically the entire program. So one nice thing, and when you tell it to do a bordered window, I don't have to draw any of that crap. That's all done with the operating system. I just tell it I want borders and I want scroll bars. So that's all I had to do. And of course, the auto follow mouse that's all the operating system. There's no basic code doing that either. If I say click here, it's going to say mouse click at 112.26 on the screen with button 1. Over here. No, I'm saying I clicked at 28.26 button 2. I will mention right now I have scaling turned on, which means it assumes the Windows is 640 by 200 period. So it's scaling within this technical at 320. You can turn that off if you want actual mouse coordinates. The nice thing about doing scaling though, it doesn't matter what way you resize the window, it's always returning that same range. So you don't have to rewrite code for a different size window. Unless you've got certain things that are absolute coordinates that you have to worry about. And then if I click up here, it says that I clicked at 424.0 in the menu region, so it knows it up in the control area. But I didn't make a selection because I just clicked a random empty chunk that doesn't have a menu to pull down. And there I hit the scroll up and it actually exited the program. That's what I had to do if you click on the scroll wheel. So actually menu 4, which is one of the internals for the up arrow. And the item actually, in this case, if it's a scroll area, it doesn't have an item. I will be changing that in the future because I want to be able to click on anywhere on the side to jump down or just have page one at a time like it does now. So basically, I just had it exit out and it said you hit scroll up. So I already know that particular menu item. So if I'll run it again, I'll actually do an actual menu. So that one you can see we talked about before, I had the first three enabled and I had format disabled. And you can see it's kind of dimmed out, it's not a bolded font. And if you move down, you'll see that it's actually highlighting everything. Once again, no BASIC09 code is doing any of this, it's all done in the operating system as part of that one command. And here I exited that particular menu so that no selection was made. And I'll pick memory, which we did not have any disabled items, and the other two items, you can see both here bolded. And it's the last part of demonstration, but I can just run one of these, I guess. Yes. So my program actually registered, if you hit the disk menu and you pick the first item, it's going to run dirt command, but I actually changed the colors. I did an overlay window and I did another win set. So overlay windows have their own settings that you do win set on, while your outside window is still, the device window is still running with the scroll bars. In this case, I picked a double box. And basically the operating system went in, it's drawing the double box outlines and stuff. I don't have to do any of that, but just one parameter to change. I did change the colors. And you can see here, I just did a dir command, I just did a shell dir, so I'm calling the external dir command. Just do that out here. And there I pulled off the menu, the other menu, the other one, and it basically did the same overlay window with the double box, and now it's externally calling the create command. You can call anything. You can call like the play file command if you want to, play a WAV file in the background, which I've actually used in a couple of games like Battleship, stuff for explosion sounds. You can call graphics things. Well, you can call anything basically, as long as it is not the screen windows. Some programs you run will actually redefine the windows themselves, and then this will get hopelessly confused. So make sure you know what you're doing. There's a list of the processes running. Proc itself is more defined for an 80-column screen because it has a lot of extra information. The procs command, the old handy one, which gives you a lot less info, actually is a little bit narrower. But you also notice too, I'm changing fonts here too. Like I've got the standard bold font on the top and the menu bar. I'm using a Mac styled 6 pixel wide font, so I can fit 53 characters on the screen instead of just 40 to fit a little more of these overlay windows and stuff here too. So selected the menu number 2, which is the hard-coded one with the close box, and it says close box to let you know that's what you clicked, and that's pretty well the end of my presentation. Go ahead, Brad.
For the mice.
Yeah.
How does the stuff know which port that you had the mouse hooked up to, or are you doing serial mouse?
Well, ease of use, we have that in the environment file, so you can set that to whatever you want. You can do that in the control panel, you can do it manually with the text editor. And you can define, do I have a high-res mouse? Do I have a low-res mouse? Do I want the left one? Do I want the right one? So you just set that up ahead of time for it. You can actually, if you're running your own program, you can actually force it to something or prompt the user. Like one thing I tend to do is I'll just say, click the button of the mouse or joystick you want to use. Because when you do a joystick read, it'll actually return all the buttons at once. You can immediately tell, okay, you click the left one, that's what I'm going to use from now on. So it's up to you how you want to do it. You can leave it to what the operating system is using, but you can also set yourself, or you can do it on the fly.
Okay, because so if you're playing, plug a mouse into it right now, which port is actually active?
Yeah, well, in this case, I'm actually cheating to the keyboard. I'm not even
Right,
using
I'm just
it.
saying, it did plug one in right now.
Yeah, I think I feel like what's your ease of use default to? Yeah,
Okay,
and you can change it.
okay, so it's defined.
Yeah, it's predefined when in the,
Okay, I didn't know if there was like a mouse, or when you define it, you can't define it on the fly.
Yeah, you can.
Parameter, or you can't, so
Yeah.
you can say, oh, look at joystick port left.
Yeah.
Right, okay.
it's just that the actual ease of use project, it has it predefined as a digital mouse.
Yeah, and you can change it.
And you can change that.
Yeah, if you change the environment file, it's a system-wide change. So every time you boot, after you change it, it'll always come up whatever you prefer. And the keyboard mouse overrides that anyway, so you can use that no matter what you've got defined. So if you actually screw up and you plug it in, you don't feel like unplugging your joysticks, you can just use the keyboard mouse as a temporary stopgap.
And if you want to get in and change your system setting files, I did do a video on that too.
Yeah, I'll plug for a site.
So you can't get the system to reverse the environmental file. Can't change it.
G-Shell, I think, it doesn't do all of it, but G-Shell, if you fire G-Shell, let's say you quit G-Shell and restart it after you changed it, it will bring in the new changes and set them. I don't know if it does all of it, because we have a lot of stuff in the environment file that wasn't in the Tandy one. There's like printer settings, there's COM settings, some of those were in there before, but we've got a bunch of other default. We've got 2 sets of palettes, the original Tandy one only had the system palettes. We have G-Shell specific palettes and the system palettes. So if you want your GUI to look a certain way, but not fry programs compatibility, where all of a sudden you're trying to read a screen that it defined with the old blue, red, whatever was defined, you can still run those okay. So, and there's a bunch of other things we've added in there too. Some of the stuff's still in from Tandy, like keyboard repeat speed and delays. But you can define like the default G-Shell graphics mode in the environment file. So if you want to boot up in any column, or want to do 4 color, 16 color, or 40 column, whatever, you can actually do that in the environment file. So it always comes up the same. And that wasn't the original multi-view at all. That was added by us. So, just a show of hands here. Who actually has done some BASIC09 programming? Even if it's just a little bit to get your feet wet type thing. Oh, that's good. Rick kind of goes, I don't know, maybe I did.
Well, I know I did, but it was like, pounded at 45,
Yeah.
Not much.
Yeah, it takes a bit of a while to get used to. Like when you first get into it, it's quite different than this basic. I mean, some of the commands are similar, like print and draw and stuff like that. But there's a lot of new commands. There's a lot of structured commands like loops and then repeat, and, while in, while, and that kind of stuff. Kind of more based on Pascal. You can get stuff like watch Ken's videos for lots of these here coming up. But you can get complex type declarations. You can define actual. Almost like a mini database of stuff that you can then start accessing by record. You don't have to sit there and just parse multiple arrays to get the guy's phone number, the guy's name, his usernumber, whatever type thing. You can actually have that as one complex structure, and you give an array for that entire structure. So you're doing whatever dot name, whatever dot usernumber type thing. So yeah, exactly. Yeah. Any other questions? And Ken and I are actually, I should mention this, Ken and I are planning to start doing a series of live streams on BASIC09 specifically. We'll probably pick a topic, but we'd like you guys to send us a message on Discord or email or whatever if there's certain things you would like covered on it. And then we're also going to just take free things from the chat room, or anyone who wants to join the session on Discord there. They can actually join us in and do some live stuff. We did one live one, you were around the time, but we did one live BASIC09. I think it actually was pretty well received. It lasted several hours. So it's even more boring than this. But feel free to come along. And like, aside from the fact you can do all this stuff easier, you've also got a basic that actually has integer variables and byte variables and Boolean variables and strings and complex types and stuff. If you've noticed in some other basics, like the BBC Micro and others that have integer variables, you can do things much, much faster because in this basic, everything's floating point. Even a 4 next loop counting from 1 to 1,000 is doing mantises and exponents internally for the entire darn thing. Integer math is way, way faster if you can fit variables in that. So the speed difference between BASIC09 and this basic for certain things is, orders of magnitude faster, not just 20% or whatever. I will also mention I'm actually starting to optimize BASIC09 for the 6809 processor.
6309.
Nope, 6809.
Oh, 60.
Yeah, the 609, we've already got some pretty big optimizations in it right now, but I've been kind of going through the code. Micro wrote really tight code. There's not a hell of a lot I can do to speed it up, but I have found a few little things in there that they didn't use direct page enough, I think, is one of the things. So I've got James Jones doing some testing. I've actually optimized the real floating point addition and subtraction, and it's running about 2.5 to 3% faster than the standard micro one is. And from my very brief testing, it seems to be working okay. It's not giving me the same results it did before I did the changes. But James is a math guru, so he knows how the internal mantissa shifting and all this kind of stuff is going to work. So he's going to do extensive testing. If that passes, I found a few places I can speed up the real multiplication and division as well. So I'll be doing that next. And there's a fairly big speed up I've got to do in the 639 and the 609 for string handling. And this is based on Chris Decker's work, who did a program called Basic Boost back in the late 80s. He sold it in Rainbow. And internally, BASIC09, if you're doing strings, and you can have strings up to 32K, just so you guys know, if you need big strings, BASIC09 is really good for that. But basically, all the string functions parse through looking for an FF to mark the end of a string. So if you have a long string and you want to add 2 strings together, it's got to go zipping through, because it knows what you defined as your maximum size, but it doesn't know how big the extra string is. So it goes every character looking for an FF. And then on the second string, every character looking for the FF, and then copy them over one at a time. And what Chris Decker did is he noticed there's a header on every single variable in BASIC09. Part of it is a 6-byte, I think. Yeah, 6-byte. And it's got stuff like, what type is it? Is it Boolean? Is it real? Is it a floating point string? Whatever. And then it's got some parameters like pointing to where is the variable, or if it's a numeric variable, it'll actually have it embedded right in there, so it doesn't have to actually look up. It's right in the structure as you're going through it. But in the case of strings, what he found out is it only has a pointer to start, and the rest of that little header packet's not even used. And he goes, why don't I add the length in there? And as long as I change all the string functions to update that as you're doing things, then I immediately know where the string is. I don't have to go through all this parsing to add anything else from mid strings or left strings or anything like that. And he got a huge speed increase out of that. And I've got to now backport that because his source code is completely different than ours at this point. But I'm going to be doing that. So all the string functions will now have the lengths embedded in. It's the 16-bit number for the lengths. And then all these string functions just start speeding up. The larger the strings, actually, the faster the speed up will be, because if you're trying to parse a 1K string and you have 900 characters in it, it's going to have to do a load A, compare 900 times to figure out the end of the string. Now it's just going to load that little 2-byte size and just jump straight there. So you'll be seeing string functions getting a huge speed increase. Woo! Coming to an EOU near you. Any other questions or questions on the windowing type stuff we're showing, or BASIC09 in general, or EOU in general if you want to? For anybody who's still awake.
I might have missed, or just want to have it refreshed. When you were talking about the reserve menu numbers, when you're numbering your...
Like defining the numbers you want your menus to have? Yeah.
Do you have to be concerned with other applications?
No, because that's locally to your window.
It is local, okay, great.
Yeah, even the Tandy ones, I mean, it's reserved, the whatever it's returning is on that particular window. Now, if you're doing graphic character, like cursors, like we're talking about, or if you want to change the cursor shape, those are universal. And we've seen alternate, I mean, some people, like there's the hourglass one that Tandy did, which actually looks like triangles, because I don't know why they didn't curve the hourglass. I've seen people put little font balloons with zzz, type thing, saying it's busy and it's snoring. It's kind of like everybody here in the... But Steve?
Regarding your James Jones optimization, he chimed in, he says, I have the framework for those tests, just got to do them.
Cool. Yeah. Thank you, James. I'll have more for you, James, after you're done that one. Other questions? Oh,
Questions not specifically based on 9, but in OS 9 there is a very narrow font, which on an 80-column screen is I think about
106.
106.
I was actually using that font on those over the ones, the blue ones. That's actually what I was using.
If you're, that only works if you're a graphics screen.
Correct.
And updating screens is slower.
Yeah, because I mean, a text screen is like a 4K for an 80 column. It's like 16 or 32K if you're doing graphics. Depending on what you're picking.
This has to do with my registration process where I'm using a spreadsheet, which I wish I could fit all the columns in on the screen, but I can't. The trouble is then I have to be scrolling left and right to study one particular line because I have too many columns. And at first I thought, well, let me try the other font. And the trouble is that I can fit more columns, but the software itself, the Dynacap software, doesn't know that.
Yeah.
And so it's only using 2/3 of the screen, but when I get to the right 2/3, it wants to scroll.
Yeah, the program has to be aware, like the Scred text editor that came with the development system actually does have a -W equals, which is the width of the screen. And if you run that narrow font, you tell it it's 106 columns, it actually does properly use it. So it's the software itself has to be patched to know. I know the VED editor, I'm actually working on doing a patch to allow it to actually use that too, so you can do 106 column for text editing on that. We'd have to patch Dynacap. Yeah, unless it, like Dynacap was written back when they were doing it on terminals, and some, the higher end terminals had 132 columns and 160 columns, stuff like that. So if Dynacap was written for that or has a term set file or something, then you might be able to, you might be able to do some changes in that, and you might actually be able to do it in 106 columns. The operating system, like if you do a cursor XY, it does know how to handle the 106 built in. The program just has to be smart enough to call it. Yeah, I mean, there's one. I mean, do you have a 609 or are you still 609? Okay, first thing, get a 609 because that will speed that up. And when Ed Snyder at Zipsterdome gets the gaming X in full production and you can kick it up to 3 megahertz instead of 2, that makes a huge difference. I was demonstrating a little bit at the table there. I don't know if people got the 609 gaming X speed mode. I showed the press screen practice because it's a bunch more obvious how fast it's running. Now it's running like 20 frames a second on the gaming X. But yeah, there's a couple things. The 609 is speeded up probably about 30%. And the gaming X will speed it up about 130%. It's still slower than hardware text. I mean, you're moving a lot of pixels around. In the case of a 6-bit font, you might be having to shift them around depending where it's on screen. You can actually technically fit more than 106 columns too if you turn proportional text on, because then it basically takes the width of the actual character, just scans the character itself. Well, it screws up formatting because every character is a different size. So I mean, yeah, I can fit more, but now I have no idea where the hell on the screen I am unless I go through every character and figure out, okay, that was 2 pixels wide, that was 4 pixels wide, that was 3 pixels wide.
Thank you.
Yeah, Jay, I should mention Rick Euland on his little demo of his network card, his little browser that he did. He's actually running graphics when he actually uses the narrow font for some of his stuff too, to differentiate between bolding and headers and stuff on HTML. And he also showed let you return to your naps.
What do you mean?
Will you be signing autographs later?
Of course.
Yeah, okay.
Don't use John Hancock, it's been done.
Yeah, I'm just kind of scared. Like, if anybody was at PenFest 2000, we had Mark Hawkins and Microware was actually there. And as a Ron Bull somebody came running up to him and he just went, "Sign my back." And you can see the look of complete shock and horror on Mark's face because he didn't know how to react to this.
So in other words, do that to Curtis.
Everyone.
I can't remember if we caught that on tape at that time, but yeah, Jason and Felix over there will be able to tell you, but it was hilarious. Mark was almost unsure if he should have been there at all at that point. But he got free cake, then he was okay. If nothing else, I think we're finished. Thank you, and check out Dan's website. He's doing further videos on BASIC09, and we'll be doing the live streams. We'll announce it on the Discord and on the show as well. So.
And you can actually get a link to the videos that I did on Curtis's EOU website. He has a link to.
Yeah. And the disk image with these sample programs you can grab off my site too, which I mentioned.
All of this GUI stuff works from C2.
Sure.
Thank you, Curtis and Ken. Thank you.
Thank
Two
you.
times. Thank you. Thank you.
Is it a public question or do you want to talk about it?
How are you, Mr.
Bruce.
Great overview.